In this session, we'll cover a solution we call Resource Manager. I touched on this briefly in the opening session this afternoon. This is a solution that's designed to support your remote Sage 300 users or non-Sage 300 users that need to record timesheet, overtime, and leave tracking information against PJC projects or for Canadian or US payroll. So with this solution, it's designed to act as a portal, what we call ESS or Employee Self-Service Portal, which is distinct from the CRM portal that some of you might be using if you've incorporated Sage CRM in your Sage 300 environment, or the Sage portal that's available now through the Sage 300 web screens. So what we want to do is integrate employee-centric activities around timesheets, or also expense reports, purchase requisitions, and other activities, so that non-Sage 300 users can participate in generating accounting transactions without actually logging in to Sage 300. And the way they do that is through the ESS portal, which is what you see on the left-hand side here, and that can be configured and customized to show only the applications that are licensed to a particular user. And then managers and finance accounting people will be able to do their workflow approvals through the portal as well, or through handheld devices. We have both native Android and Apple iOS mobile apps that will run on smartphones or tablets that you can incorporate the same transaction processes as you do within the portal. And as you license the portal applications, we give you free access to the mobile apps. We call it a hybrid solution because Resource Manager consists of both a back office module that you see here, which installs into the Sage 300 environment. This is the classic Windows desktop, but we also have the web screens for Sage 300 web screens. And so you would get all of this functionality when you purchase the Resource Manager Windows back office module, and then you license the individual web-based applications for the portal. So the real key benefits are that it is all one solution with Sage 300. It's written in the software development kit for Sage 300, and even the web applications are fully integrated into the Sage 300 database. There's one database to provide true integration in an affordable, mobile-enabled application that incorporates the activities of employees outside of Sage 300, but captures the data in a timely basis, gets it approved through approval workflows, and updates Sage 300 in real time without any rekeying of the information. So when we look at the various functions within Resource Manager, we have the e-purchasing component for purchase requisitions, receipt and invoice requisitions, AP invoice and AP payment, which will be the subject for our next presentation this afternoon. Today's session is focusing on the time management aspect of Resource Manager, which incorporates timesheets, leave tracking, overtime, and time clock attendance. Last week, we talked about the employee expense reports. So if you missed that presentation, it will be posted on the BAASS website. And if you registered for those sessions, you'll receive a link from BAASS to be able to view that session. We also incorporate project management capability for scheduling of projects, resource planning, billing and costing, and other requisitions such as sales quotations and reporting. Notice that if you use timesheets for payroll purposes, we also have the ability to publish pay stub information to the ESS portal so employees can get their pay stubs through the portal and you don't have to print and mail those pay stubs. We've added recently attendance functionality, which supports clock in and clock out functionality on our mobile applications. It also incorporates geofencing capabilities. Geofencing is a concept where you can use GPS tracking on a smartphone or a tablet to identify the specific location of an employee. So when they're logging in and logging out of a job or recording timesheet information, you can verify that they're actually on the job site where they're supposed to be. And as they record their time in and out of the job, that automatically creates transactions for the timesheet that they're going to submit. So it supports multi-location, multi-lunch break and rest breaks, depending on union rules or company rules, and a total summary attendance report, so you can identify when they've missed punching in and out that needs approvals or updates, or just a review of all the activity they've done for the week. So the miss punch request feature would automatically get routed to their manager, and they could update the fact that they were actually on the job, but they just forgot to punch in that morning. And these options are configured as part of the back office module within Sage 300 under the time management menu option of Resource Manager. So when we're using attendance, the application creates essentially a software-based time clock where they can punch in and out of the application, and it will record by day the clock in and clock out time and calculate the hours that they worked. And if there was a missed punch in or punch out, that would send a requisition to their manager to approve the fact that they were actually working that day, but they just forgot to submit or clock in. The attendance portal, as part of the ESS portal, will give you a summary listing of their attendance in and out of jobs from the mobile device and record all the information, including description information, if they're recording that as part of their punch in and punch out. So now let's go to the live demo of Resource Manager and show you how this application can work for you. So here's the back office Resource Manager module. As I mentioned, you get all of this functionality incorporated into the module when you license it. And with reference to time management in particular, you'll see that we have the attendance options, the leave tracking, and then the timesheets themselves. Under the setup options, I'll highlight a few of these things, and then we'll go through and show you the recording of a web timesheet and doing those approvals. So as part of the configuration, you can determine how often you want time recorded, right down to every minute or quarter hour, or in this case, hour. You can specify minimum and maximum work times, what the usual work time is, which could be tied to your overtime calculations, which I'll discuss in a few minutes. You can also determine default work times and break times, especially if you have shift differentials and you want to be able to incorporate the fact that one shift might be an 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. shift, another one might be 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. And with the timesheets themselves, you can determine whether you allow multiple timesheets per pay period or only one timesheet per pay period, whether you support fractional time or negative time on those timesheets, whether you allow time entries on holidays or not. And what it's referring to there is the fact that we have work calendars built into Resource Manager, where you can specify what is a work day versus a weekend versus a holiday, which might have impact on the rate that you're paying the employees, whether it's a bonus rate or an overtime rate because they're working on a weekend or a stat holiday. And then the roles will determine the rates at which people are working for labor costing purposes, either for PJC or just for payroll purposes, and then a billing rate depending on their role, which will determine their charge out rate on projects if you're integrating to PJC, project and job costing. In addition to those setup options, we have the time periods. So you can determine whether you're setting up on the work calendar weekly or bi-weekly time periods by work calendar. And that will also incorporate the holidays and weekends. And then the pay codes allow you to determine different pay codes for the different employees and how you calculate the amount that's owing. That could also include overtime pay as a specific pay code. And if you're running Canadian payroll in Sage 300, or US payroll for that matter, you would be able to link these pay codes to the pay codes that you've set up within the payroll manager module. And also for leave codes, you might have sick pay that you can incorporate. And we give you the ability to create formulas against these pay codes. So if there's specific calculations that need to be managed, we give you the ability to create complex formulas, which might be based on collective bargaining agreements or simply negotiated pay programs for your different types of employees. And then the leave codes are something that you also incorporate different types of codes for with a description, and you can determine whether it's related to PJC or not, and how you allow leave, any days, remaining days, or available days, whether you have a credit limit on that, and what pay code it's associated with, and whether there's leave request workflows. So if people want to request sick days or vacation days, you can incorporate workflow approvals around those leave requests. So as you're building out these leave codes, you'll determine whether you're resetting them weekly, monthly, or annually. And then based on that, you can specify what the formula is. The accrual can be done monthly, daily, weekly, or yearly. And again, based on that, it might be determined on which day of the month you set the accrual. And when do you start those accruals? Is it so many days after hire date, a specific date, or some sort of seniority date that you use? And then the accrual formula, again, will allow you to specify any of the fields in the database with mathematical operators to determine what that calculation basis is. And you can set a maximum number of days for your annual leave, your vacation, and also sick days. So as you're recording time in the system, depending on how you've structured your leave codes, there will be leave accounts that are created for each of the employees. And this will be keeping track of that information for the various leave codes like annual leave, and calculating things like days remaining, days reserved, and days available. You'll also have the same option when you're looking at sick days, and you'll be able to see when people have been taking days, and you'll be able to drill into the detail and see what they've taken and what's remaining, and whether you put a limit on that to stop them at zero, because as you can see here, they actually went negative in this case, and whether you allow carryover of those sick days or not. The leave account history will be recording for each of these codes what days were taken and who took them. So the history is going to be recorded based on the timesheet activity or any leave requests that are made in the system. So while this is not an HR system per se, we do have the leave tracking capability by leave codes that you establish in the system, and giving you the ability to go in and view the information as it's being recorded. So you can see days accrued, days taken, canceled, adjusted, and then the history of when that was taken, or in this case, a carryover. So that's the leave tracking capability. And then there are leave requests that can be done in the back office, but they're also done in the portal. So finally, I'll just touch on overtime very briefly. So with the pay codes, leave codes, you can see in this system, we don't have overtime turned on, but it does allow you to create formulas to calculate when overtime applies, and if it does apply, how it's calculated. And then if it is calculated, is it banked or cashed? So let's start going through a specific transaction showing a timesheet entry. But just before I do that, I want to highlight the approval workflows, and then we'll look at the integration. So with the approval workflows, all of the documents in the system, you can set up a workflow approval around. And then for timesheets in particular, we can specify who participates in the workflow approval. So you can specify a supervisor, which is by definition my direct report, or if you've used our region division breakdown, you can also have a region manager, division manager participate in the workflow approval. If you're integrated with project and job cost, it could be a project contract manager or a task manager or a phase manager if you've assigned different managers at the different levels within a project and job cost job. You also could use the concept of an approver group. So where you've got multiple managers managing an individual employee, you might have a group of 3 managers and say, well, as long as 2 of the 3 have approved the timesheet, we'll be okay with it. You can also incorporate custom rules for specific criteria that you want people to be approving these timesheets with. The other thing I'd like to highlight here is, sorry, it's used approver group. Let me go back to supervisor. The other thing I want to highlight here is our decision action. So if you use a decision action, what we're allowing you to do is incorporate your own business logic. So in this case, we could say that the custom variable is if hours are less than or equal to 40 versus greater than 40. We might use that criteria as a special condition for how the timesheet gets approved. In other words, if I go over 40 hours, the standard approval process gets modified to either include another level of approval, so we go from 1 or 2 levels to 2 or 3 levels of approval, or we route the timesheet to a higher level individual in the organization to approve the fact that this person has worked more than the normal 40-hour week. So that's just one example of criteria that you can specify to automatically adjust the workflow based on the information that's part of the timesheet. Notice that we use email as an alert function here as well. That's a common theme in a lot of these new applications. So when I submit, reject, or approve a timesheet, the email can be automatically generated and sent to the appropriate person. And so, of course, as you've seen in other applications, there are email templates that we use to set up the kind of wording you'd like to put into that email message. And in the case where the timesheet was approved, we could just say for this year and period, it's been approved. If it was rejected, we might have certain notes, policy notes that say this is why it was rejected. And then if it's submitted, then we remind the manager that it needs to be submitted. So we can embed a URL link to the portal for them to do the approval, and they can do that right on their smartphone, or they can log into the portal and do the approval that way. But either way, we want to ensure that as these timesheets are submitted, the appropriate people are notified and can take action based on that notification. So this is the ESS portal. When we log in as an employee, if we have multiple Sage 300 companies, we can choose between them. I'm using a company that has PJC projects in it, so we'll show you the integration to PJC. But just so you know, if we wanted to integrate in different ways, under the options, we choose the modules and applications we want to integrate Sage 300 to. So in the case of this company, we're integrating to PJC, and as we approve the timesheets in Resource Manager, we can automatically post them to project and job cost to make sure that we don't have to rekey the information, so that as we get approved timesheets in Resource Manager, it will update the PJC time card automatically. Likewise, you could then post it up to payroll, or you could generate a payroll time card if that's the way that you've integrated within the system. So you have those options. So here you could see I could integrate with Canadian payroll and generate a Canadian payroll time card as well. And there are other integrations based on which applications you use. In this session, we're focusing on timesheet. There's leave tracking. We did not turn on the overtime, and we can use the attendance features, but there's other functionality there as well. And you can incorporate budget information, which we'll show in the next session when we talk about purchase requisitions. But just to show you that it's a very comprehensive module with a lot of functionality built in. So now we're here logging in as the employee, and we see timesheets are one of the ways that I can record information. If you'd like, you can post historical information about previous timesheets that I've submitted and have been approved and posted through for costing purposes. They might have been approved but not posted through for payroll or project costing yet, or awaiting approval, or possibly rejected, or open for any timesheet that I started but I didn't complete and submit. When I click on the New button, I have the option to set up my initial timesheet. And you notice the system understands that we're integrated with PJC. So the system will be able to show me the project that I've been assigned to, the company or customer that I'm working for, and the tasks that are part of that project that I want to be able to incorporate. Now notice the WBS. This is something that gets incorporated because of norming projects. It supports a work breakdown structure that can go 15 levels deep. So within PJC, you've got the 3 levels. But if you want to track activities below just the 3 levels, you can actually create a work breakdown structure within Resource Manager to track more detailed information. And then the tasks, and then the category, which determines my pay code, which in this case is hourly. And then I could also add overtime as a line item or put my sick time on the timesheet as well, and it would update the leave account. So let's say this is a great job, and we can start entering our time. Now this is our standard timesheet where I'm just entering my time, and I could put in fractional time and other things. I could also comment, and that would be stored in the cell, and you see a little blue asterisk there, and when I cursor over it gives me what the comment is. I'm just going to enter in the 8 hours, but the other option would be to use the in-out timesheet. When we showed the clock in, clock out as part of attendance, there's a very similar procedure if you're not using attendance and you just want to put a start time and a stop time on a timesheet. You can enter information in the portal and just put a start time and stop time, and it will calculate the hours. So whether you're using the app or the portal, we still have that capability. And the only difference is we do it just for the timesheet, or in the case of attendance, we can clock in and out. The other thing we do is we can add attachments. So let's say we were working on a contract for a customer and we wanted to attach the contract details. The system supports document attachments for all of the transaction types that are possible. So let's say we're going to add an Excel spreadsheet. In the next presentation, I'll add a PDF. It really doesn't matter because all of those are valid file types. We support any type of file type. Notice as well that we could copy a timesheet from a previous period, and if I'm doing the same job week after week, that would streamline the data entry for me. If we use our resource planning, we're assigning resources or people to projects and jobs, we could use the resource planning calendar to generate my worksheet because it would know in advance which jobs I was supposed to work on, and then I would just edit that for what actually took place. When I'm finished, I can submit this timesheet into the workflow, and it exposes the approval workflow for me. So it's going to give me a date and a timestamp when I submit my timesheet. Any comments will be added, and I know that Freddie is doing the approval. Now, if Freddie happens to be away, we support the concept of substitution. So Freddie could substitute another manager to do the approval while he's away, if that was required. So now what I want to do is I want to close this timesheet and show you a couple of other things about the system. So we'll follow up on the substitution comment that I made. So we'll log in as Freddie, and he's logging into the same company, the PJC Projects company. And you'll see that there's a function called toApprove here in the portal for managers. And you notice that Freddie's got 3 documents. So when he logs into the portal, he's getting notification that he's got some documents to approve. Now, he could have received an email, as we talked about, as part of the approval workflow, and he could click on that link and it would bring him to the portal to do the approval. And when he opens up the approval console, he sees the timesheet that was submitted today, December the 10th, and he can click on that and he can review the information, look at the attachment, and open that up as part of the approval process. And it happens to be an Excel sheet. So McAfee does its thing and does the scan before it opens it up, and it verifies the details of the supporting document. But what happens if Freddie forgot that he was going to be away today and the timesheet is left hanging? Well, we have an administrative portal to take care of that in a couple of ways. One is our to-do list. So from the back office perspective, we have a to-do list where we can see by Sage 300 company. So we'll look at our PJC Projects company. There's the timesheet that we just submitted, timesheet 9, December the 10th. And we could do the approval as a back office function because we know Freddie is away today and he didn't substitute. Or we could transfer it to another manager and have them take care of the approval in Freddie's absence. Now, of course, if Freddie knew he was going to be away, then he could have substituted himself. And we'll talk, and I'll just show you that when we log out and do the approval. But let's go ahead and do the approval. We'll just say okay. And because there's just one level of approval on this document, it clears from the approval console and it goes into Sage 300. So when I come to my timesheet back office batch list, that timesheet has already been set up in Sage 300. So there's no rekeying, there's no import export. It just simply creates the batch automatically because it's one big system. So the timesheet is being identified as coming from the ESS, or Employee Self-Service Portal. And when I open up the document, you'll see that all of the details from the portal have been captured and set up as a transaction batch within Sage 300. So I have the project details, the work breakdown structure, the division region, my role, the fact that this is billable, it's my hourly pay code, the notes that I put in. It also has the comment that I added for this day, and it's got the labor cost and the billing rates associated and the other time details for each day that I worked. It also shows me the approval audit trail with a date and a timestamp and the comments. The attachment that we added in the portal is now in Sage 300, and I can preview that as a document attached from Sage 300. And then any optional fields and the document details. It also defaults in information about the employee name and the period. We add that as a description for the batch entry automatically. And you can see the entry status is that it has been approved, and now it's just a question of posting it through to update project and job cost, which is how we've integrated in this particular sample company. So it generates the PJC time card, and there is no rekeying again. We also update the GL for the transaction details and the PJC time card. So now if I go over to project and job cost and I open up the time card entry within PJC, you will see that there's a time card entry for today's transaction. So it'll be the last timesheet. There's the timesheet 9, transaction date December 10th. And you can see the summary information of the days and hours that I recorded. And if I go to the time detail, you see that the contract project category information is all there. The fact that my earnings code is hourly. Now we didn't use start and end time. It just put in the hours, which is how we set up the standard timesheet. And it knows the payroll account to set up the accrual, and it costs it to the work in progress account on the project, and my comments that I added to the timesheet are there as well. So very seamless, very simple to use, and a great way for you to capture this activity as close to the source as possible. Submit it through the portal so that it can get approved, and then once it's approved, it sets up the timesheet entry automatically for you. Now, as I mentioned, there were a couple other aspects I want to identify here as part of the administrative portal that allow you to be a little more proactive, and that is schedules. What we can do is we can add a schedule as, let's say, a weekly reminder to make sure that timesheets are being submitted on time. So this is like an automatic email notification that goes out to the employees to ensure that they're getting any missing timesheets in. And we can specify that this goes out every Friday at 12 noon. Likewise, we can send out approval reminders to our managers to ensure that they're getting their timesheets approved on a timely basis, whether that's daily, weekly, or we can specify what that is. So by adding a schedule code and setting up a scheduled process, we can remind employees to submit those timesheets. We can also remind managers to make sure that they're getting their timesheets approved on a timely basis. And as I mentioned, if they're not going to be available, they can actually have someone else do their approvals, or you can have people do timesheet entry on someone else's behalf if you know you're going to be away, let's say, for the next week. And then the system would automatically route the approval on the timesheet to the manager that Freddie nominated to take his place while he's away. So I'll finish with that and open up the floor for any questions that we might have.
So the first question I have is it possible to put leave information such as sick days on a timesheet?
Yes, absolutely. So if we have timesheets configured that way, then one of the options under the pay code will be a leave code. So you could put sick time or vacation time on the timesheet and it will update the leave account appropriately.
Can one person enter timesheets on behalf of other people in the organization?
Yes, exactly. So that's what we just showed with the substitution feature there. So if we use the substitution feature, then I'm able to specify not only somebody approving, but also entering timesheets on my behalf.
How does the system handle overtime?
Okay, so in the case of overtime, I think what I could do is go to another company, but just to streamline this, the overtime can be either entered. So you saw on the timesheet that overtime was another pay code. So I could either enter the overtime on the timesheet itself, or I would configure the overtime to be set up as part of the system so that as I enter timesheets, it's going to automatically calculate what that overtime is. So if I move over to another company quickly, and this is the company that I'm going to use for the next presentation anyways. So in this case, if I wanted to set up overtime under time management, you'll see this one is configured. I have an overtime bank that is going to track the overtime that's been earned, adjusted, cashed, written off. And when I set up the formulas under setup here, overtime rules can be specified, which determine three things. First of all, it's based on either timesheet or overtime requests, and it can be based on a daily or periodic, other words, weekly. And when I set up the overtime rule, I have an overtime pay code that it's assigned to, and then I can establish three things. What's the criteria for when overtime applies? So is it more than 8 hours in a day, or is it more than 40 hours in a week? And when it does apply, what's the formula to calculate it? And when I've calculated it, how do I manage that? Do I pay it? Do I bank it? Do I cash it? So all of those are options when you set up your overtime rules. So thank you for asking for that.
And the last question I have for this session is how many levels of approval can you support in Resource Manager?
Okay, very good. So under the approval workflows, you can have up to 99 levels of approval. So that's really just a technical aspect of the program. Most of our clients wouldn't go more than 3 or 4 levels of approval, but technically you could go as many as 99.
Perfect. So that does look like that's all the questions for this session.